Pursuant to Standing Order 108-2 and the motion adopted by the committee on Tuesday, February 12th, 2026, the committee is meeting on the situation in Venezuela. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format. Pursuant to the standing orders, members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. I would like to ask all in-person participants to consult the guidelines written on the cards on the table. These measures are in place to prevent audio and feedback incidents and to protect the health and safety of all the participants, including the interpreters. I'd like to make a few comments for the benefit of the witnesses and members. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. For those on Zoom, at the bottom of your screen, you can select the appropriate channel for interpretation. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. For members in the room, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. For members on Zoom, please use the raise hand function. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best as we can. I would now like to welcome our witnesses. From the Department of Foreign Affairs, Trade and Development, the Honorable Stuart Savage, Ambassador, Permanent Representative of Canada to the Organization of American States by video conference, and Wendy Drukier, Director General, South America and Hemispheric Affairs. Welcome in person. Up to 5 minutes will be given for opening remarks, after which we will proceed to rounds of questions. I now invite Ms. Drukier to make an opening statement.
Thank you very much, Chair, members of the committee. Nicolas Maduro presided over Venezuela from 2013 until January of this year. During this time, corruption became institutionalized in the government and military at all levels. The regime co-opted the judiciary, the economy was mismanaged to the state of ruin, and authorities engaged in systematic political repression. The regime became a beneficiary of, if not an active participant in, illegal mining, money laundering, drug trafficking, and other illicit revenue streams, working with non-state and criminal armed groups. In response to this corruption, attacks on democratic institutions, and systematic human rights violations, Canada has sanctioned 139 individuals since 2017. The EU and UK have also imposed sanctions on the regime, and the US imposed both sectoral and individual sanctions. Under the leadership of Maria Corina Machado, the opposition mounted a coordinated campaign for the 2024 presidential elections, which they handily won, as shown through official voting tallies collected by poll watchers. Maduro nonetheless declared himself the victor and unleashed an unprecedented level of political arrests and violence to counter popular protests. Canada, the US, the UK, and the EU, along with at least 8 Latin American countries, refused to recognize Maduro's claim of victory. Then on January 3rd, 2026, U.S. forces executed Operation Absolute Resolve, deploying military aircraft and special operations troops into Venezuela to capture Nicolas Maduro in what they have framed as a law enforcement action. The arrest of Maduro was an unprecedented moment, and its long-term repercussions are still very much uncertain. So the context has now changed. Delcy Rodriguez is the de facto acting president and is being recognized as Venezuela's leader by the U.S. under what it sees as a 3-step plan, consisting of an initial phase of stabilization, a secondary stage of recovery and institution rebuilding, in order to prepare for what it sees as the 3rd phase, a transition to democracy. The Venezuelan economy remains fragile following years of hyperinflation and a massive contraction of GDP. Roughly 60% of households lack sufficient income to purchase basic food, and acute malnutrition remains high among children. Venezuela ranks among the least peaceful countries globally, characterized by high levels of organized crime and limited law enforcement effectiveness. As a result, approximately 8 million Venezuelans have left the country since 2014, making it one of the largest displacement crises in recent history. The regime in Venezuela that stole the 2024 elections and imprisoned hundreds of political opponents remains in power. Nonetheless, there is now cautious optimism in the country. Over 600 political prisoners have been released, although hundreds more remain incarcerated. An amnesty law has been passed, but it has limited scope, and loopholes may allow the regime to rearrest people. There have been some nascent moves towards attracting international investment to rehabilitate crumbling infrastructure and generate oil revenue for the country, although the lack of rule of law and predictability remains significant disincentives. Le Canada s'engage depuis longtemps à appuyer une transition démocratique.
Canada is committed to supporting a democratic transition and respect human rights in collaboration with other countries in the region. Canada is cooperating to fight against crimes against humanity that may have been committed by the regime since 2014. Canada played a key role in the international response to the migratory crisis of Venezuela. The government organized or organized 2 major conferences with donors to support refugees and Venezuelan migrants and provided strengthened capacities and technical assistance to countries in the region. Since 2019, Canada has paid in over $260 million in humanitarian aid.
Maintenance of long-term stability. And we believe this must come in the form of a peaceful democratic transition led by Venezuelans. Further destabilization risks regional disorder, including heightened tensions, violence, and criminality, all of which can reach Canadian shores. A democratic, stable Venezuela could become a valuable partner for Canada, strengthening cooperation on hemispheric security, democracy support, and multilateral engagement. Finally, in the medium to long term, Venezuela could offer significant opportunities for Canadian companies, particularly in energy, infrastructure, mining, agri-food, energy transition, environmental impact mitigation, and related services. Venezuela is a large country with a relatively well-educated population, sitting on a cache of natural resources that could bring about substantial prosperity if developed in a transparent, democratic, and responsible manner. Such a Venezuela could be a middle power strategic partner for Canada. We hope that Venezuela moves in that direction and are ready to help enable that change. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your remarks. I will now open the floor for questions from members of the committee, beginning with Mr. Chong. You have 6 minutes.
Okay.
Sorry? What's that?
Is the other witness?
Thank you.
No, just...
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for appearing to talk about the situation. So I've got a number of questions. The first is, you've outlined that the Trump administration has a 3-part plan that involves stabilization, institution building, and thirdly, transition to democracy. Does the Government of Canada support that plan, or does it have a different view of how things should unfold in Venezuela?
Mr. Chair, it's a very important question. We know that the U.S. is playing an important role in Venezuela right now with its work with the de facto regime. Canada believes that, as mentioned in my statement, that we need to move to a transition to democracy led by Venezuelans. How that is put into place will be developed as the situation unfolds. We're 2 months into this current situation. And the first priority is to ensure that the country does not descend into chaos. But we do believe that the priority should be a democratic transition, and we stand ready to support that.
Thank you. You mentioned that the current government is being led by Madame Rodriguez. You also mentioned the democratic election. Overwhelming results of the last election for Mr. Gonzalez and his co-partner, Madame Machado. Does the Government of Canada support them playing a role in the Venezuelan-led democratic transition? And if so, what would that role look like?
In terms of a democratic transition, the Government of Canada believes that this should be determined. How that takes place should be determined by Venezuelans, and that includes all political parties, opposition, and civil society. That would include, of course, Madame Machado, Mr. Gonzalez, and the other major players, and they've pronounced on the desire for new elections in Venezuela.
And so, in other words, the Government of Canada would support both these individuals having a role to play in a transition to Venezuelan democracy. Okay.
I can absolutely say that the answer is yes.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. Thank you, because that's our position as well. The Government of Canada has not had diplomatic relations with the previous Maduro regime, and that continues with the government led by Madame Rodriguez. What are the conditions for establishing diplomatic ties with the government in Venezuela?
Mr. Chair, Canada has not recognized the current regime in Venezuela. We haven't recognized it when it was led by President Maduro, where we don't recognize it now. A number of members of the senior members of the regime are sanctioned by Canada. The de facto power that this regime has is the result of fraudulent elections or elections being stolen in 2024. Canada would be looking for a recognized democratic, transparent process in Venezuela to be able to officially recognize the government.
Okay, and what are the what is a democratic process? Like, do elections have to take place first with the appointment of a new head of government and head of state before Canada will reestablish diplomatic recognition of the government of Venezuela, or does that happen earlier than that?
Yeah, I wouldn't want to speculate on the steps involved that Venezuelans will determine in terms of that transition to democracy. At the moment, we don't see conditions for official recognition of the government. We would have to see the process that unfolds in order to determine when the right moment would be.
The other question I have is Operation Absolute Resolve was characterized by Secretary of State Rubio as a law enforcement action. And therefore, and this is my assessment, if that is the case, then it would fall within international law. Is that the view of the Government of Canada, that Operation Absolute Resolve was a law enforcement action and that it fell, therefore, within international law?
Mr. Chair, the Government of Canada understands the U.S. analysis, the legal analysis that was done by U.S. authorities on the legality of that action, and they do characterize it as a law enforcement activity. The Government of Canada hasn't done that sort of assessment in terms of the application of U.S. law to those actions.
Okay. And so, therefore, you don't have an opinion about whether or not that operation was within international or U.S. law?
I certainly don't have an opinion. I don't think it's my place to have an opinion on
Okay, thank you. I appreciate you answering that question. I don't have any further questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We go next to MP Rob Oliphant. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to both of the officials for being with us today. I'll be asking 3 questions. One with respect to the displaced persons, about a quarter of the population. The second with respect to the role of the OAS and Canada's position within the OAS. And the third one will be on any possible normalization or not of diplomatic relations. With respect to the displaced persons, estimates are about a quarter of the population, or maybe 8 million people, maybe 9, it's hard to get the number, have left Venezuela. We know that they've gone to a variety of countries in the neighborhood, as well as some island states nearby. Is there any sign, is there any sign of them returning to Venezuela since the so-called operation, or is there a sense that this will be a longer, protracted displacement of people?
This is an important question, I think, because the volume of displacement is so large, and the vast majority have remained in the region. Government of Canada, through our missions in the region and from Global Affairs headquarters here, we've been consulting with those who work on these issues the most, including the International Organization for Migration, the UN High Commission for Refugees. Our missions on the ground have been consulting with partners. We haven't seen a significant return nor a significant change in the number of Venezuelans leaving the country since January 3rd.
They were leaving at a rate of about 2,000 a day, even as recently as a month ago. That continues.
That's correct.
Point d'ordre, Monsieur le Président. La dernière question, le microphone de mon collègue n'était pas ouvert.
Point of order, the microphone turned off. Could you repeat the end of the intervention for the benefit of all our colleagues?
Oh, maintenant c'est ouvert. Je peux faire
Okay, now it's on.
I ask.
So that was just about the 2008. They're not returning. That was it. The second question, really for Mr. Savage, would be the role of the OAS in this. Obviously, Venezuela has had I believe a suspended a position within the OAS of late. Has the OAS made proclamations about Venezuela since January? Is there any change in the positions? And what is Canada's position at the OAS vis-a-vis Venezuela?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for that question. The audio working properly?
Yes, it is.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. The OES, as the hemisphere's main political forum, has taken the issue of Venezuela seriously and continues to follow it with great interest. In the OES, Canada attempts to play a leading role to ensure that the situation in Venezuela remains on the agenda, and have been quite successful in that regard. Over the last year or so, since the last elections in Venezuela, which were, as my colleague, Madame Drucker said, were not recognized for being fully free and fair in 2024, the OAS has had 9 separate discussions on Venezuela in different ways, shapes, and forms, including in August of that year 2024, the OAS was the only international organization that was able to come together on a consensual document calling for restraint and the publication of the election results and respect for the popular will of the Venezuelan people in the face of what was apparently happening in Venezuela at the time, and the Maduro regime effectively stealing those elections. Since then, there have been a number of other topics. I could go through them if you'd like, but it certainly has remained on the agenda. And most recently, we discussed Venezuela at the OAS on January 21st about the situation of political prisoners in Venezuela. So I'm happy to expand if you want more information.
Fine. I think I will go on with respect to the possible normalization of diplomatic relations, whether there's a process in mind for this. Right now, we do not have an embassy that is open. Mission, we have a skeletal staff apparently working out of another country's mission. Is there any plan on reopening an embassy or establishing a normalized relationship?
Thank you, Chair, for the question. It is true that we do have a small number of locally engaged staff on the ground in Caracas. Canada actually hasn't had any diplomats in the country since 2019. We did not formally close the embassy, but we were not able to send anyone in because the Venezuelan authorities would not grant visas to Canadian diplomats. So this is a situation that we will continue to examine under the change in circumstances. Most of our, if not all of our large like-minded countries now have a diplomatic presence and have continued to have a diplomatic presence on the ground in Venezuela. The U.S. has reestablished a diplomatic presence, and as the Government of Canada, we are looking at the conditions that may allow to have Canadian diplomats return there.
Thank you very much. Next, we go to MP Duceppe. Vous avez 6 minutes.
You have 6 minutes. Thank you, Chair. I have a question to come back to what the Conservatives asked before. Ms. Drucker, you said you don't have an opinion about whether international law was violated or not, but at the Department of Global Affairs, are there experts in international law? Yes, we have a directorate. So when an event of this kind happens, do you consult those people? Yes, of course, if we have to. Okay, and did you consult those people when this event occurred? Yes. And what did they think? What was their response? They provided advice to the minister, and I'm not in a position to talk about the advice that was given to the minister. So you're not aware of what was said to the minister. Well, I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not trained in international law. Right, but my question is not about you. It's about the knowledge in the department. So you say there are people who are trained in international law who assess whether or not international law is violated in certain circumstances, and they provided advice to the minister. But you are responsible for South America. You were not aware of the advice that was given to the minister regarding this situation? I am aware of the advice, but I'm not at liberty to share that because it was advice that was given to the minister. But from your own department, you're not able to provide us with what the department assessed. This was advice to the minister, so it's not my role to share advice that was given to the minister. Okay, can the ambassador tell me if it is in his purview to tell us what advice was given to the minister? Is this a state secret? Do we have to do a request for information to get in more detail on the advice given to a minister? We can't make that public?
Mr. Chair, and the question is clearly intended at getting at some information which, as my colleague said, gets into the realm of ministerial privilege. And as public service, we are here to advise and support our ministers, and we are not at liberty to express or share the advice provided to ministers in their decision-making process.
Parfait.
All right, thank you. You do say that the minister could tell us if the advice that was given goes in one direction or in the other. So we could ask the minister in that case. Ms. Drucker, can you tell us if the economic situation has improved since the Operation Absolute Resolve? Thank you for the question. It's a difficult question to answer because we don't have a lot of information on the situation. We know that the arrangement between the U.S. and the Venezuelan regime means that revenue from oil is returned to the U.S. to be used for essential things like education, healthcare. We understand that there's a little bit of improvement in terms of the economy, but we don't have anything quantifiable, so we can't determine to what extent things have improved. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. I'd like to ask you a simple question. Within the OAS, is there consensus on how to assess the situation surrounding Operation Absolute Resolve? Is everyone agreed that it was a good thing or a bad thing, or are opinions divided?
Chair, there is clearly a subject here that has not been the formal discussion of any direct exchange at the OAS per se. So I would only be able to intimate and guess, and I think a number of the government member states of the OAS have made their own specific bilateral indications of their views on that operation, and I would refer you to those rather than trying to interpret those for you. But I think I could fairly say that there are a variety of views, but there's also a variety of perspectives taken, which are not all starting from the same point.
Okay.
All right. But just to be sure and clear, I imagine that you have press reviews, briefings. I imagine that you're able to analyze a situation and different countries' positions. We're lucky to have you here as a witness because you have a specific expertise and infinitely more knowledge than we have. And so the reason why we invited you here is not to speak on behalf of others, it's to bring us certain facts. I imagine that you've had briefings, and so because you're an expert in this matter, you must be able to tell us how these different countries are positioned when it comes to the operation that extracted Mr. Maduro.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The expertise I and the team here have is shared, of course, with our headquarters, who works to develop Canadian positions based on multiple sources of information, including that which I provide through the OAS in our channels here. However, we are not the only ones providing that information and input to the decision-making process. And so I can repeat that rather than try to give you the views that may or may not be the most recent from 31 other member state governments of the OAS, that if you would like, I could try to seek the statements and provide those to the committee, but we assess those things both from here at the OAS, from our missions abroad in the capitals of those countries, and through the missions resident in Ottawa. And therefore, I think mine is but one part of a larger puzzle in coming together to the Canadian position.
Thank you very much. We start the second round of questions, beginning with MP Ziad Abul Taif. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the witnesses. The question is, do Canada approve the Operation Absolute Results?
Mr. Chair, it's a very clear question. Unfortunately, I cannot provide a very clear answer in terms of of the meaning of the word approve. Canada is certainly, as I explained in my opening remarks, we had great criticism for Nicolas Maduro and how he ran Venezuela in terms of corruption, human rights abuses, lack of respect for democracy, etc. And as the Prime Minister has said, we are now taking the world as it is and trying to look at how things will go moving forward in terms of the situation in Venezuela right now and how it may progress.
The impression out there is that the Canadian government approve the operation after the operation is done. That's just to be fair. After that, the Prime Minister said on January 3rd, 2026, that Canada has long supported a peaceful, negotiated, and Venezuela-led transition process that respects the democratic will of the Venezuelan people. Then he further said that he stands by the Venezuelan people's sovereign rights to decide to build their own future in a peaceful and democratic society, end quote. Now, the operation led to the replacement of Maduro with his vice president, despite the democratic process that took place, was supposed to end up with having Mr. Urrutia as the president of Venezuela. And you've indicated that Canada would support that direction. But between you're giving me unclear answer. You're giving me no answer basically on the Canada approval of the operation. On the other side, there's two statements from the Prime Minister. How can we reconcile that? So make the public opinion, so give it to the public, the clear position of Canada on this important issue.
Mr. Chair, I would thank the member for quoting the Prime Minister, who said it much better than I could. I think his position was very clear on that question.
His position is very clear, but the position of supporting the operation is not clear. And as I said, there's an impression out there. It's a clear impression. I'm not going to quote anything, but there's a clear impression that Canada supported the operation. And that's a fundamental, basically, contradiction between the official, the two statements of the Prime Minister versus the support of the operation, because each one of them have led to will lead to a different outcome And that is a clear contradiction and leave Canada with basically unclear position on the whole situation. So I'd like to ask you the question again. Can you confirm to this committee that Canada has no position or had no position on the Operation Absolute Results?
Mr. Chair, I'm not sure about where the member's statement around the impression out there that Canada supported the operation. I certainly don't have that impression either way, and I think, as I said before, that the Prime Minister's statement was very clear, and I certainly wouldn't want to.
But with all due respect, you did not deny, and you did not say otherwise. The question, you said you don't know. But this is a very fundamental element in this whole conversation. I would love to see a clarification to that position. Whether yes or no, it doesn't matter. But at least we need to know what is the exact position on that.
Point d'ordre, Monsieur le Président. Je pense que
A point of order. I think the witnesses answered very clearly. They support what the Prime Minister said. So I feel they've answered the question quite clearly. I don't think it's necessary to go over that again.
If you can conclude
But
the
my
question,
question is
because you've
very
asked it
clear.
a number of times.
The first answer said she does not know. That is no yes, no, no. I would like just yes or no, and there's no hard feeling. Just yes or no.
Madam Drukier?
Mr. Chair, I would just want to clarify that I don't believe my response to that specific question was I don't know, and I would just call members' attention again to the Prime Minister's statement.
Okay. We'll move to the agreement between Venezuela government and the U.S. administration on the facilitation of the sale of Venezuelan oil. Do we have any feedback on that agreement between the two parties? Because that definitely affects our industry and our position in general. Can you advise us of what's Canada's knowledge of this agreement?
Very quick response, because we're over time.
Thank you, Chair. We're not aware of a written agreement or specific details of that agreement. We do know that the sale of oil is happening, and we know under what general conditions, but there have been a number of executive orders and other measures from the U.S. government that have governed the evolving situation.
Merci beaucoup. Next, we have MP Mona Fortier. You have 5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci d'être.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to our witnesses for being here today to help us understand what's happening at the moment. I have information on what happened in the past, but maybe we can focus on what's going on right now. That's what I would like to explore with you. So, Ms. Drucker, what kind of instruments do you have to assess what is happening on the ground in Venezuela? And how can we support Venezuelans? So what kind of instruments do you have to assess all of that and then to provide advice to the minister and then to the Prime Minister? Thank you for the question, Chair. I think it's very important to talk about how we can support Venezuelans in this process, and also talk about the source of our information. Unfortunately, we don't have anybody on the ground. It's been several years. But we do have diplomats and officials who are following the situation very closely, including people at our embassy in Bogota, in Colombia. We talk to Venezuelans in the country and outside the country. We talk to United Nations agencies, and we talk to colleagues who do have people on the ground, for example, colleagues from the United Kingdom. So we use all those sources of information to create a portrait of the situation. When it comes to how Canada can contribute and help, as I said in my presentation, we have development projects. We're working with local groups, with non-governmental organizations, and other groups to help in humanitarian aid, protection of vulnerable groups, and we also respond to international calls for help from the Red Cross, for example. And since the U.S. operation, can you tell us if any additional assistance has been given to the Venezuelan people, and if so, how much, and who received that aid? Thank you. The humanitarian situation hasn't really changed much on the ground, so we continued with the humanitarian aid that was already in place. Development projects take a bit longer. The situation is evolving, and we hope that we'll be able to do more on the ground. I would just like to come back to something. You said that right now we don't have the right conditions to have a stronger presence on the ground there. That you talked about exploring the necessary conditions that might lead you to be able to send people on the ground. So what are those conditions? What would allow us to send people back there? Well, first of all, the first thing we always look at is the safety of Canadian diplomats. We have to make sure that if they're on the ground, we can provide safe and adequate conditions. There's also the issue of accreditation. If we want someone to be posted there permanently, then the authorities have to give that permission to us. Now, do you know, when it comes to consular services, is there a Canadian presence? Is there a need there? I imagine that we can work with our allies or with our presence in Colombia, but is there an increase in requests? The level of demand is not very high. Our people in Colombia contribute. We haven't seen an increase in applications since January 3rd. So there's nothing new in terms of making sure there's a higher investment or increased capacity to support consular services there. Not for the moment. Thank you.
MP Duceppe, you have 2.5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Monsieur Savage, je pense que vous avez...
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Savage, if I'm correct, you have training in international relations. Is that right?
I do have some studies in that, yes.
OK. Et dans cette formation-là, est-ce qu'il y a des cours de droit?
And did you have to take any courses in international law? I took a look at the curricula, and I'm wondering if that's the case, if you had to study any international law.
Introduction to international law, yes.
Fantastique. Je vais vous poser une question complètement...
Wonderful. I'd like to ask you a completely hypothetical question. If an allied democratic country decided to lead an operation in a non-democratic country, and without speaking to their allies decided to withdraw the president from that country, according to what you've learned during your studies, would this be the type of situation that might violate international law?
Mr. Chair, I appreciate the thoughtfulness of this question, but I understand that I'm here to respond factually to Canada's relationship and actions in the OAS vis-a-vis Venezuela, and I would not want to get into speculation on hypotheticals if I want to respect what I've been told.
Parfait, Monsieur. Parfait, j'ai bien compris, Monsieur.
Thank you. I understood. Ambassador, if I'm not mistaken, one of your roles is to inform the government of Canada about what you know and what you do within the OAS. That's your role. You send communications. when a major incident occurs, because this must qualify as a major incident, I imagine you communicate with the Government of Canada. In those communications with the Department of Global Affairs or anyone else, do you sum up the position of the different countries within the OAS, or do you say absolutely nothing on the position of the other countries?
On the matter, Mr. Chair, in question, it would normally be part of what we do on matters that are significant or of significant interest to Canada to indeed reflect the views of other countries, and particularly the more important players around the table. But again, this would be part of a broader information exercise that would involve others, parts of the Global Affairs Network as well.
Thank you very much. Next, we go to MP Crampton-Nyman. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you. The Prime Minister stated Canada attaches great importance to resolution of crisis through multilateral engagement and is in close contact with international partners about ongoing developments. My first question is, specifically, which international partners has the government been in contact with, and through what forums or mechanisms did these take place?
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. The Canadian government has been in contact with other governments at various levels, in part through discussions at the Organization of American States, through bilateral communications between ministers, for example, as well as officials. That's part of the work on the ground of our missions abroad, is to speak to local authorities about important situations or developments in the world. We've been in touch with many countries in Latin America and the Caribbean. We've spoken with European allies as well as the United States.
Thank you. Further, was the Canadian government made aware of Operation Resolve prior to January 3rd? And to follow up, did they receive advance notice?
The Canadian government was not made aware of the operation prior to it being carried out. We were not given any advance notice.
Okay. Did Canada coordinate its response through any other bodies, or was it unilaterally just within the Canadian government?
Canada's response to the developments, clearly this was a situation that happened quickly. We had a statement from the minister, I believe, the same day. The Prime Minister issued a statement as well very quickly. This was primarily done by the Canadian government. Whether
primarily? Was there any other bodies
I'm not
involved?
aware of any consultations that happened prior to those statements. That doesn't mean that discussions weren't had that I was not aware of.
Okay, fair. In the department's opinion, what is the best case scenario for, let's suggest 12 months from now, for Venezuela, and what is the worst case scenario? And how can Canada leverage our foreign policy to help affect positive change in Venezuela? In your opening remarks, you suggested that ideally you don't want to descend in, you don't want to have Venezuela descend into chaos. So what's the best worst case scenario?
That's a great question. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I think the best case scenario would be effective stabilization of the situation, an orderly democratic transition led by Venezuelans, as I've stated before, and hopefully that would mean the reconstruction of independent democratic institutions, amnesties for those who have been persecuted by the regime, and free and fair elections that would allow Venezuelans to choose their leadership. On the other hand, a worst-case scenario might involve increasing violence, criminal activity increasing, a loss of control of security forces in Venezuela, which could then spill over to neighboring countries and even to North America.
Okay, thank you. May I ask, how many times approximately has your department met with U.S. officials specifically on the topic of the regime change in Venezuela?
Unfortunately, I wouldn't have a count for that. Our interactions with U.S. officials happen at many levels and on quite a regular basis. And when this issue might have been raised, I don't have a record of that I could share.
Could you please speak to the current situation for Canadians themselves on the ground in Venezuela, and how are we getting support that they need?
Thank you very much for the question. Of course, we take our consular responsibilities very seriously. As I stated earlier, we haven't had an increase in demand for consular support in Venezuela. We have around 7,000 Canadians registered with our Registry of Canadians Abroad in Venezuela. There are likely more that haven't registered, but we haven't been asked to bring assistance to those Canadians.
Has there been any discussion with Canadian businesses operating in Venezuela?
We haven't been discussing with Canadian businesses because there are very few that we're aware of that are actually operating in Venezuela. The conditions just haven't been the right ones. But we anticipate that there may be more interest as the economy stabilizes.
Okay. And my last question, has there been any conversations about deploying CAF assets to the region in Venezuela?
Mr. Chair, to my knowledge, there has not been any discussion regarding CAF assets, but that would probably be a question for the Department of Defense.
Perfect. Thank you. That's all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we go to MP Stephen Guilbeault. You have 5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci aux témoins d'être.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being here. I have 3 questions. So if I understood, Ms. Drucker, what you said that up to now, you haven't observed any major changes on the ground when it comes to the refugees situation, correct? You talked briefly about humanitarian aid. Can you tell us a little more about what that humanitarian aid looks like, who our partners are on the ground since we don't have a presence there? I imagine you have local or international partners. Can you elaborate on that? Yes, with pleasure. I'll just consult my notes because we have several partners on the ground, especially for humanitarian aid. So our main partner is the Red Cross and UN agencies. We support food assistance, medical issues, and nutritional programs and other essential needs programs. If we try to think about the future a little bit, you said earlier that we're looking at possibilities of doing more. Are there any criteria that might lead us to do more? Chair, normally Canada responds to international calls for humanitarian aid, so it depends on the situation on the ground and how those needs are assessed primarily by UN agencies. And last question, can you confirm that we gave amnesty to political prisoners in Canada? Unfortunately, I don't have that data. I'm aware that there have been several applications for asylum, over 1,000 in the last year, but I don't have the data about how many were granted or not. That would be a question for our colleagues in immigration. Thank you. I don't have any further questions, Chair.
Thank you very much. We start the third round of questions, beginning with Madam Rood. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, witnesses, for being here today. Given that Canada formally recognized Edmundo Gonzalez Urrutia as president-elect in January 2025 and has never recognized the legitimacy of Nicolas Maduro, what does the government of Canada currently recognize? Who does the government of Canada currently recognize as the legitimate leader of Venezuela?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. It's a very complicated situation. Canada recognized Edmundo Gonzalez Urrutia as the president-elect of Venezuela back on January 9th, 2025. The government of Canada did not recognize him as the president. So we actually do not have a recognition of a legitimate leader of Venezuela at this time. And given the change in the situation on the ground, this change in the political situation as well, we've heard from representatives of the Venezuelan opposition, such as Mr. Gonzalez, such as Maria Corina Machado, the Nobel Peace Prize laureate, that they would be looking towards a transition where there would be new free and fair elections.
So why has Canada not taken a stronger steps to support Nobel Peace Prize laureate Maria Corina Machado, the clear choice of the Venezuelan people, instead of tactically accepting a U.S.-backed arrangement with the deeply corrupt and long-sanctioned Delcy Rodriguez?
Mr. Chair, I would not characterize Canada's position as a tacit acceptance of U.S. working with the regime. We have been working with the Venezuelan opposition, including Maria Corina Machado, for some time and engaged in dialogue with her. The Prime Minister spoke with her following the events of January 3rd of this year as well. But we are also looking at the situation right now. Venezuelans did pronounce themselves in July 2024. That was more than a year and a half ago. The situation, of course, has changed, and we do support any measures that would lead to a democratic transition led by Venezuelans.
Delcy Rodriguez remains sanctioned by Canada under the Special Economic Measures regulations for her role in human rights abuses and corruption. How does the Government of Canada interpret her recent actions, such as prison closures, amnesty, oil sector reforms, as anything more than cosmetic changes designed to preserve the same corrupt Chavista network that looted Venezuela for decades?
Thank you for the question. I think it's an interesting characterization. I'm certainly not in a position to read into the motivations of Delcy Rodriguez in terms of the measures that have been taken. We do, as I mentioned in the opening statement, we have seen this modest progress. We will have to see how things evolve over time. I think time will tell as to whether these changes may lead to more changes and more opening up of the country. We are very cautiously optimistic, I think, about the situation in Venezuela, but we certainly don't believe that we've turned the corner just yet.
Is Canada actively considering lifting any sanctions on her or other regime figures, or will sanctions remain until verifiable, irreversible anti-corruption reforms and free elections are achieved?
The Canadian government reviews the sanctions regime and does new consideration of sanctions, whether to impose new sanctions or take other measures on an ongoing basis. We have not made any changes to that sanction regime since January 3rd, and we are monitoring the situation.
So looking ahead, what specific measurable actions will Canada take to ensure the Venezuelan transition results in real democracy rather than a rebranded version of the same corrupt regime? Will Canada lead efforts at the Organization of American States to impose strict anti-corruption conditionality on any future assistance, actively support Maria Corina Machado's role, and maintain sanctions until free and fair elections are held under international observation?
Those are a lot of points in one question. I'm not sure. I will try to unpack some of them. We certainly will maintain pressure. We are working with our partners on this and with the international community to continue to bring attention to the situation in Venezuela. Canada has not set up strict conditions which will say once you meet A, B, C, we will now lift sanctions or we will move to recognition. We are following the situation as it evolves, and we will take those decisions as they are warranted. I wouldn't want to speculate as to what the next steps might be.
Thank you. The U.S. government is now marketing Venezuelan oil and controlling the proceeds through U.S.-managed accounts. What is Canada's detailed understanding of this arrangement, and does the department share the view that routing revenues through transparent U.S.-controlled mechanisms is the only way to prevent the same corrupt Chavista insiders from once again stealing billions from the Venezuelan people?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. This is from what the Canadian government understands in terms of the arrangement for the proceeds of the sales of Venezuelan oil, the Venezuelan government needs to submit very detailed plans for spending those funds before they are transferred from the U.S. I'm not a financial expert. I don't know if there would be other viable mechanisms or whether this would be the only mechanism. I would not be able to pronounce on that.
Thank you very much. We'll next go to Rob Oliphant. You have 5 minutes.
Mr. Chair, and again to thank the witnesses for being here. I want to pull the lens away from Venezuela for a moment to the neighborhood and to look at the immediate reactions to the January operation, and if there's been an evolution. And I know that there's been some discussion about the ways and means of the removal of Maduro from office, which may be different from the results of the moving of him away from the office. And I'd like to focus on Brazil and Colombia and perhaps Guyana as the neighbors that are touching it, and whether or not what their initial reactions were, and has there been any evolution in those responses, and is Canada in discussion and collaboration with the neighbors as they're doing it? And that could be either you or Mr. Savage. Both of you would probably be aware of these issues. Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. Obviously, there have been a lot of reactions to what happened this January. I believe that, and we are discussing this with those neighbors and other countries in the region on a regular basis. I believe that the Brazilian statement was very clear, condemning the actions of the United States. Guyana, I believe, from what we understand, they are relieved that the attention has been drawn away from the contested Essequibo region, which Venezuela has been trying to claim as its own, but is currently under Guyanese control. And the third country was Colombia, yes. Colombia, of course, has certain considerations to take into account, in particular in security around the border area between Venezuela and Colombia, with Colombian illegal armed groups, the FARC dissidents, and ELN that operate on both sides of the border, so their main concern, on a practical sense, has been to make sure that violence doesn't spread or that isn't displaced into Colombia. I think it would be fair to say that for every country, they are following developments. I think statements were made initially after what happened on January 3rd, but most countries like Canada, we are looking forward to see what the next steps might be, and would want to support Venezuelans in a peaceful democratic transition.
And moving from the south and east and west side to the north and the small island states, I understand a number of them would have received, been purchasing oil from Venezuela over the last number of years, and they may not have oil now, or they may, I'm not sure. What would the state of their energy reserves be in these very small island states that would be quite dependent on Venezuelan oil? Are the Americans helping them with oil, or is it still restricted?
It's an important question. We're not aware of any need for help for these small island states. The supply of Venezuelan oil over the years had actually declined as production within Venezuela declined. But these states, aside from the very different situation in Cuba, most of these states can purchase oil on the open markets. They don't absolutely need to be receiving it from Venezuela, although they were receiving it with subsidized rates for some time.
Do I have more time? Okay, I just want to then go back to political prisoners. You mentioned back inside Venezuela, there's been a release of some 600 political prisoners. I have no idea what percentage that is. The Maduro regime was ruthless and vindictive and creative in finding ways to incarcerate anyone who was critical of the regime. Do we have a sense of what percentage that might be, even though we don't probably have numbers? And are we making any representation towards their freedom?
Mr. Chair, Canada continues to push for the immediate and unconditional release of political prisoners in Venezuela. Estimates prior to the beginning of January were that there were perhaps around 8 to 900 political prisoners in Venezuela. That number has evolved as the weeks have drawn on, partially because it's believed that some family members have declared their family members as being political prisoners, whereas prior to that they may have been afraid to characterize it that way. So it's very difficult for us to put a number on how many political prisoners are still in prisons. But I think it would probably be fair to say that more than half have been released.
Thank you very much. We go next to MP Duceppe. You have 2.5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Madame.
Thank you, Chair. Ms. Drucker, do we have a sense of how the drug dealers are doing on the ground? We know that they worked with Maduro, but now that things have changed, are they still very active? Chair, we don't have a lot of data about that. As you can understand, it's difficult to measure illegal activities, but we haven't seen much action against these people since January 3rd. So the assumption is that things continue as they were. Okay. Next question. Are there still people who support the former Maduro regime, or are people on the ground happy about the change? Well, the streets of Venezuela are pretty calm. There's not a lot of protesting one way or another. Now, we assume, because once again we don't have contacts directly on the ground, but we assume that after January 3rd there were people who came out to protest Maduro's departure. There were also measures to criminalize any expression of support. So since there was so much political repression, the majority of the population stays at home. You seem much more aware of the reactions of the different people than the ambassador. I asked the ambassador the same question twice and he was not able to answer. So are you aware of any actions by these other countries in terms of humanitarian aid in Venezuela? Unfortunately, I don't have a lot of information about that. We don't think there has been much because there wasn't an international call for help, and there hasn't been much change on the ground. If there had been an increase in violence or less food security than before, there may have been direct measures by neighboring countries. Thank you.
MP Michael Chong, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to talk about Venezuela in the context of energy and also great power competition between the United States and the People's Republic of China. You mentioned in your opening statement, and I think throughout your testimony, that Venezuela is sits on huge oil reserves. I believe the largest oil reserves in the world. I think almost a fifth of the oil reserves in the world are in Venezuela. You've also pointed out that production plummeted because of the pillaging of their oil resources by the Maduro regime. My understanding is that China holds about $12 billion in Venezuelan debt, and that China was being paid for that debt not with cash or money, but with discounted shipments of Venezuelan oil. And as I understand from reports, that oil was discounted as much as $20 a barrel by the Maduro regime to pay for China's loan to Venezuela. That flow of oil and those payments in the form of oil has obviously stopped. And so could you talk a bit about what the Government of Canada's assessment is in how this impacts the great power competition between the United States and the People's Republic of China in this hemisphere, particularly as it relates to Venezuela?
A very interesting long-term question. Thank you for the question. I believe that your characterization of the situation and the relations between Venezuela and China are more or less accurate, and I don't have all the details in terms of what price they might have been selling the oil at, but absolutely oil sales to China from Venezuela have stopped. The Venezuelans, we understand, do have considerable debt to China. How that will be repaid is yet to be determined. I think we can presume that won't be a priority in the discussions between the U.S. and Venezuelan authorities. It's not. I'm not an expert on great power competition. It's certainly not within my area of responsibility, but perhaps as a foreign policy observation that China tends to be very patient in terms of its long-term interests and we haven't seen specific measures that have been taken by China to address the current situation or to try and cash out those loans to the Venezuelan authorities, but that may be because it's only been a couple of months.
Yes, I know that China has been characterized as such. I would also put that we are a very patient country as well. We're the third oldest continuous democracy in the world, and we've put up with this system for so very long because we are very patient people in working with what we have. But I digress. On the issue of oil. Venezuelan crude is heavy crude. It's similar to the heavy, but different, to the heavy crude that's produced by Canadian oil sands companies. Has the government of Canada observed any change in patterns on our west coast with respect to the purchase of Canadian heavy crude from the lower mainland of Vancouver and otherwise because of the disruption in oil shipments from Venezuela to the People's Republic of China?
Mr. Chair, this is a question well beyond my remit. I'm certainly not an expert on Canadian oil exports. Okay. I can say that Venezuelan production has marginally increased since January 3rd. However, experts on this issue don't expect the production to significantly increase for probably a decade in terms of the requirements for investment and repairs to oil infrastructure. We hear this from energy analytics firms like Enverus and ADI Analytics and independent experts as well.
I have some more questions, but I think I'm running out of time, so I'll just defer to the next round. Thank you
very much. We next go to MP Mona Fortier. You have 5 minutes.
J'ai presque envie de lui donner mon temps parce que c'est vraiment intéressant.
I almost feel like giving him my time because his questions are so interesting. But I'll start with my questions, and if I have anything left, any time left, I'll give it to you, Mr. Chong. I'd like to start with the ambassador, your role, and the role of the OAS. Within the present conditions, what can you tell us? I saw the initial declaration of the OAS, but since then, have there been meetings? Do you have any approaches that you're working on? Can you give us a sense of how you're following this issue at the OAS?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Very good question. Of course, our eyes and ears are open for the issues relating to Venezuela all the time. Things evolve. The OAS itself has a potential role to play if and when we can get to a stage where there's willingness within Venezuela to move towards a democratic transition. And Canada would be willing to use the tools available through the OAS, such as technical assistance in organizing elections and eventually election observation missions to ensure elections are free and fair when and if that time comes. In the meantime, though, we've been working with such bodies as the Inter-American Human Rights Commission to follow and monitor the situation there, read the reports, make sure that that information is shared and socialized more broadly amongst the OAS membership. We just had, as a matter of practice our biannual discussion or dialogue with the Inter-American Human Rights Commission. And their rapporteur for Venezuela spoke, and we had a good exchange on their perceptions there and the desire, which Canada supports, to have the Commission go to Venezuela and do an on-site visit to verify human rights and the human rights situation on the ground, something that has not been possible for the last 20 years. And we continue to try to look at ways of supporting that initiative. So at this time, since we've had the discussion on political prisoners last month, we are starting to look towards what we might do in the future, and in particular, discussing with partners, including, for example, the United States and Brazil and Mexico, where we could maybe see areas of constructive collaboration and where we can work together. So we continue to work on that, but I have nothing specific to report other than that we continue those efforts now. And of course, we maintain in close touch with the Secretary General of the OAS, who has the capacity to offer his good offices to work with contacts within the regime and other players in Venezuelan society. He has, for example, met with Maria Cortina Machado to discuss her views of the future, and there are other ways in which he can help facilitate dialogue.
Well, thank you.
Which we support.
Thank you. Michael, I'm going to give you the rest of my time.
Okay. So I want to continue the discussion maybe a bit more in your wheelhouse about oil and sanctions. So as you pointed out, hundreds of over 100 individuals in Venezuela have been sanctioned, including Madame Rodriguez, and those sanctions remain in place. You know, the Prime Minister indicated in his trip to ASEAN, but also elsewhere, that he wants to see Canada become an oil and gas superpower. There is Canadian expertise in precisely the kind of Venezuelan heavy crude that is being extracted in a deep sea way from Venezuela. Chevron is involved in Canadian deep sea oil extraction in Hibernia and Hebron oil fields off the coast of Newfoundland and Labrador. Presumably, there are Canadians not just at Chevron, but at ExxonMobil, Imperial Oil, Esso, that are experts at deep sea heavy crude extraction. But the sanctions remain in place. So what is the Canadian government doing to ensure that we have an opportunity to be involved in rebuilding the Venezuelan oil sector, while at the same time making sure that people are not contravening the sanctions regime that has been put in place? So maybe you could talk a little bit about what's going on there.
I can give a few responses. They may be partial, as I'm not an expert on the oil sector either. However, the sanctions that Canada has on Venezuela are on individuals within the regime. So any Canadian or Canadian company that would like to operate or would operate in Venezuela, there would not be a sanction on the oil sector per se. There are U.S. sanctions on the sector, and they provide licenses for certain companies to get involved. And for the moment, they have only provided those licenses to U.S. companies, although that may change.
So what if there are Canadians, for example, working at Chevron or at ExxonMobil here in Canada, Imperial Oil, that are being asked to go down there to work and communicate with the office of Delcy Rodriguez, who is under sanction? Like, how does that all work? How do we ensure that Canadians, aren't going to be captured by the government of Canada's sanction regime, while at the same time, ensuring that you're fulfilling the Prime Minister's commitment to, ensure that Canada becomes an energy superpower, particularly an oil and gas superpower?
For specific details on how to ensure that companies or individuals are not violating sanctions, our advice would always be for them to consult legally and consult the department. I'm not the expert on exactly how that works. I do know that these individuals are sanctioned, which means that no Canadians can benefit economically from their relationship with them. There are certain rules in place about
is
bank
that
accounts and that, but it's.
Is this a consideration in the government's path to normalization of relations, including the lifting of sanctions, that, you know, the involvement of Canadian oil and gas expertise?
Unfortunately, Mr. Chair, I'm not sure I can answer that question adequately, not being a sanctions
Well, thank
expert.
you. We'll conclude this by thanking both witnesses for their appearance and testimony before the committee. Thank you so much. I will now suspend the meeting to go in camera to deal with a few items, and we're ahead of schedule, so it should be good. Thank you.